Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Elcar LT's Altaïr Assassin Kindred deck. This is one of our donation decks. I have quite a few piled up, so we're going to be running through them over the next few videos. And Elcar says, I would like to be able to self-mill faster in order to put all the assassins in the graveyard and exile them with Altaïr. My goal is to take all the advantage possible from ETB triggers when Altaïr attacks and creates the copies. And the only restriction is just not to make it really expensive. I added some expensive cards because I already have those, but I don't want to spend a lot of money on it. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. As always, as I say, we don't try to spend a lot of money here. We try to keep the changes nice. That's 28 lands. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Altaïr and why are they our Assassin Kindred commander? They are a 3/3 human assassin with first strike, red, white, black casting cost, that's Mardu, and they have one ability. When this creature attacks, exile up to one target assassin creature from your graveyard, and you exile it with a memory counter. And then for each creature with a memory counter in exile, you put a copy of it tapped and attacking, exile those tokens, end of combat. This is immensely powerful and allows you to rebuy a bunch of very powerful ETBs with Assassin, in addition to getting a bunch of attackers that tend to be either death touch related or otherwise hard to block, making it so your opponents are taking a lot of damage while you are getting advantage. And of course, something I really like about this commander is that those creatures in exile will persist in exile, outside of a few very specific interactions, so as the game progresses, Altaïr will technically get stronger and stronger, which doesn't go away if Altaïr is removed. So, very, very cool card, very interesting. We've seen a lot of assassins lately with Outlaws at Thunder Junction, and obviously when this set comes out itself, we will have extra assassins as well. But I can see already we have a very nice collection of assassins that are very strong and enable us to get a lot of really good ETBs and a lot of really good triggers and 28 lands. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time moving past this. I think this is tough. Honestly, we're not going to go too much further into the fact there's 28 lands. 28 lands with Temple of the False Gods, which means actually 27 lands. But the rest of the deck is very strong. There's only a few things here and there that I think I'm really going to pick on, and I think the collection of assassins and even the ways to put them in the graveyard are already really, really good. I just don't really see how we are casting the majority of our deck. We can see that yes, with our fast mana, with our Simian Spirit Guides, we might be able to push out an early Altaïr, and then maybe Faithless Looting, Gamble, Entomb, or find another way to get cards into the graveyard. However, I'm shocked at what happens when Altaïr is out of the game. After being removed once, casting it for 5 seems to be a very difficult thing to do. And in a deck that's already so reliant on its commander, pressuring your commander out of the game is an easy thing for your opponents to do. We also have quite a few very high mana cards that I just don't see us ever casting. Looking at our curve even, we can see that it kind of plateaus around 4, whereas a deck with this few lands and this much fast mana, I expect to really, be in the 1 and 2 mana range. So with all that in mind, I'm going to specifically mention cuts for the purpose of putting lands in. I do have additions, and I think a lot of the additions are good, but our number one goal is to make room for at least 5 to 7 lands. I think at least. And the first one I will cut is a land, so replace this with another land, but Temple of the False God just cannot be in this deck. It is mind-blowing to be able to cast this, to play this and tap it for mana. According to our, let's see, we'll go down and press 5. According to this, our ability to have 5 lands, because this doesn't measure mana rocks as far as I remember, is 22%. And what that actually means is we need 6 lands, which it says 11% chance on curve to have 6 lands because, of course, Temple of the False God is a land itself. And therefore, that will get us to 7 on turn 6 to allow us to cast Elesh Norn. That's not where this deck needs to be. I would much rather fast mana if we can get Black Cleave Cliffs, Concealed Courtyard, these kind of things. I think they'll be much, much better. But let's see what else we can cut that I think is just a little, let's say, redundant or overcosted. I'm going to specifically look at the high mana stuff. So looking up here, I feel let's start here. Skulking Killer, I think, is very, very cute. Far too cute. Even as a 4/2 that you're going to get an extra copy of every attack, it's not a particularly strong card. The fact that the only way this is anything more than a 4/2 is that you need one of your opponents to only have one creature. And yeah, you can use other ETBs and kind of like, you can kind of make it so if they have 3 creatures, you destroy the other 2, and then Skulking Killer's ability resolves and you kill that last one. But that's not great. It's -2/-2, which also doesn't feel like enough. I think this is a pretty weak one and an easy cut. Thorn of the Black Rose, I get that it's another assassin, but I think generally Queen Marchesa is more than enough. I don't think you need 2 versions of this card, especially since you're such an aggro deck. It's really hard for you to keep the Monarch, and even then, like, I don't know to what degree a 1/4 Death Touch is going to be reasonable. Like, don't get me wrong, on ETB, when this is exiled, you keep getting the Monarch again, but unlike the Initiative that doesn't give you an additional trigger, all it does is just give it back to you, whereas when you attacked with a bunch of these creatures, you were likely to get it back anyways if that was going to happen. So with that in mind, I would cut this as being just inferior to Queen Marchesa and too much mana. Also, I'd like to point out once again that, where are you? This initiative is much, much better because that first initiative will get you that basic you sorely need. How are you going to get to 4 mana, or how are you going to put this in your graveyard and then cast Altaïr and attack? That's a different question, but for now, easy cut for land. Vexilius Praetor, I think, is fine. It just feels cute. I would rather just a protection spell. A number of white, protection from any color spells will just be more reliable, because your ability to hold up 4 mana with Flash is next to, I don't know, it's just not going to happen, I think. And this isn't even an assassin, so you're overpaying to give protection from everything on a creature that already has, really good evasion in the fact that it's a 3/3 first strike, and then can be just protected occasionally as you need. Don't forget, when Altaïr gets going, you can be ETB, you can be reanimating like assassins that have ETB destroy creatures in order to deal with whatever would have blocked Altaïr to begin with. So this feels like we're going out of our way to put a higher cost card that in the late game is not very much so important, and still fails to board clears, which I think is the cleanest way to deal with you anyways. Elesh Norn, our first of 2, feels very greedy. This is, of course, for those who don't know, the mom Elesh Norn, the Phyrexian text. This doubles all of our ETB triggers and stops all our opponents. And I will say, I do really like that this stops our opponents' ETBs, and that's definitely worthwhile, and almost the reason why I'm not going to say just take it out, but it's pretty close. At 5 mana, this is very much so win more in a deck with so few lands, and when you play this, you need to be so far ahead in this kind of setup to really take advantage of it. With a few extra lands, mind you, I don't mind it as much. Dropping Elesh Norn, attacking, getting a bunch of triggers will be very, very good, and I'm a fan of that. So I'd like to keep it with the caveat you put more lands. Portraiser, on the other hand, I think is a cut here. I need these lands desperately, and Portraiser is clunky here. With a little more haste, maybe it gets better, but it is very, very cute. And here it's you need to play them, you need to either give them haste or wait a turn cycle, and then you need to attack, and it needs to deal damage. If we had a bunch of ramp, like in red-green decks, in pirate decks, in decks that can readily put this out there, I think you have a better time. But at this power level, which once again, There's a power level where we're running tutors, we're running Swords of Plowshares, Path. I'm assuming your opponents have the same power level, and they're not going to let this creature live. So 5 mana in order for this creature just to get Swords of Plowshare is a particularly bad deal. Undercity Eliminator, this is like very, very cute, right? When Undercity Eliminator enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice something to get an exile ability. And I guess you can exile herself. That's fine, but like I don't think that's good, right? Like 5, it's just a removal each time. If this was like 3 mana or 4 mana, like comparing this to like Necrotal, even just like that, or Murderous Redcap with a sack outlet or something, you'll be killing more creatures that way. Ruthless Harbinger as well is just better because it hits non-land permanents. This just exiles creatures. It's 5 mana. I don't think this is good enough. If this was less mana, I would like it. Cut this for a land. The Master Multiplied is the greediest thing here I've seen, as you have to play this creature. You have to then have multiple legendaries coming into play off of Altaïr for this to happen, and then you like to keep the legends, or you have to use Myriad to get the extra copies, and then all of that will just be basically held up by this triggered ability to cause you to, for Master Multiply, just to hold this entire cluster of creatures back. Once the Master Multiply goes away, which once again at this power level is very, very quickly, you're not going to get any benefit off of that. In fact, the Master Multiplied comes into play, you attack, you create the copies, someone removes the Master Multiplied, you lose those copies anyways. Maybe I'm being really hard, and I know the argument of dies to removal is not a reasonable argument, but fundamentally, the power level of this deck that runs fast mana and tutors, trying to play the Master Multiplied fairly, is really, really hard to figure out. Because I think they're going to die, and they're going to die a lot, and you're going to feel pretty bad about spending the mana on that. Elshnorn Grand Cenobite is very, very hard for this deck to cast, or to play, or to cheat out. And even then, I mean, it's just -2/-2, and here at this power level, when you can't cheat them out, it's very, very difficult. Don't get me wrong, at similar power level decks, I have just slammed Elshnorn Grand Cenobite, and I'm not gonna lie, it's really, really powerful here, but once we get to enough lands, I'm not going to be as hard on it, but here I think it's just okay. I think this is fine at the top of the curve, but it has to be the top of the curve. We have to cut all of these other cards that I've said. We have to maybe even cut Bolas' Citadel, and then maybe we're getting to a point that I think that's fine as the final card you cast to win you the game. That being said, it does also not really work as well with the deck as much as, you know, a Mother of Machines does, but because of its sheer power level, I think it's fine. Looking at the rest, I'm generally happy with it. I think Unexpected Windfall should just be a land. Once again, I do appreciate that it's discard, but and generates treasure tokens, but I just like the land instead. I just want a land. Just give me the land, please. And Fast and the Furious, likewise, both abilities are a bit overcosted for what they do in order to make it into a card that is 2 halves. However, both of these halves are just too much mana and not very good, and I don't think you want either of them. Notably, Furious wipes your board too, so therefore should just be something like Blasphemous Act or Toxic Deluge, because it's not like you're keeping your creatures anyway. Akroma's Will is close at 4 mana, but it is so profoundly strong that I think it's fine. It is noteworthy that Akroma's Will has to be cast after, like, you've attacked, and then the trigger goes on the stack, and then you cast Akroma's Will, whereas Akroma's Will sometimes can be preemptively cast earlier in the turn in reaction to a spell, or like starting to go into combat, which makes it really, really powerful. But here you have to specifically cast it right after the tokens come in play if you want them to get these modes. If you don't want to get them, care about those modes, and you just want to protect Altaïr, I think it's fine, and I don't think it's too bad, but just be aware of that very, very specific ability. Looking over here, we have Lucille, or Giza's Favorite Shovel, as I prefer. This feels really, really clunky. This is 6 mana to equip, 2 to play, 4 to equip, and that's far too much for this deck for an ability that all it does is force a sacrifice. This is just not gonna, I just don't think this is gonna jive in this power level and with the mana that you have. It's just gonna lay around, it's not gonna equip, and when you go to equip it, somebody's gonna kill the creature or destroy Lucille, and all of a sudden you've spent your entire mana on something. Once again, I'm not trying to point out the fact that it loses to removal, I know everything does, but the sheer power level that you are showing and how susceptible your deck is to specific pieces of removal, especially on your commander, this feels like a liability for sure. Mask Nexus, I think, also is very cute and definitely win more, because this is a card that requires you to have reasonable creatures in your graveyard that aren't already assassins. Then you need this out for 4 mana, then you need your commander out, and then you need to be able to attack. All of this without Maskwood Nexus being removed, your commander being removed, or the creatures being exiled out of your graveyard. That is a lot of work for a card that outside of 4 mana doesn't really do, like outside of that specific thing, doesn't really do anything. I guess, you know, making other things assassins can be cute with a few, you know, things like adaptive automation, but like not really why you're using this card. You're using this so you can reanimate Elshnorn turn after turn, right? That's why, or reanimate, I don't know, something else. And for that reason, I just don't see it here. The One Ring likewise is cute. I'm not going to ask you to take it out, but I really don't see this being the thing you want to cast in this deck, as yeah, you'll be drawing a lot of cards, but I don't really see you doing much with it. The One Ring is very, very powerful when you can back it up with tons and tons of resources, mana, extra combos or combat steps or turns or something to take advantage of this, whereas you are playing it incredibly fairly, and it is basically a Phyrexian arena that gets stronger quickly, or a Necropotence of sorts, without the control, right? I think this is, I know the One Ring is good, but we can't just slam One Ring into everything. You're going to find yourself without a commander, without creatures, playing the One Ring and taking turn after turn to just draw, hoping for lands, and I'm not too impressed by that. I think it's fine to keep in, but it is something that I did want to point out. Bolas the Citadel, like I said, I think absolutely should be removed. You are playing Bolas the Citadel incredibly fairly, and you are not ramping it out. Don't get me wrong, I do see that you could be using your fast mana to ramp it out, but even then, you're completely locked by 2 lands, one on top, one that you've already played, which I might say maybe that's not going to happen with 28 lands, but otherwise you are playing out probably incredibly okay cards that cost a decent chunks of mana for something like Mirror Entity, for something like Rafine's Silencer, for something like Murder's Redcap, without, you know, something to regain you all that life, something to give them haste, something to do with these creatures. You're just burning through your life for a setup that's going to be removed by a board clear, or someone's just going to destroy Bolas the Citadel. So with that in mind, I would probably remove the Bolas the Citadel. I just think it doesn't belong in this kind of deck. In terms of enchantments, I love Curse of Opulence. I think it's good. Mask of Law and Grace, and and Brave the Stand. Okay, let's start with Mask of Law and Grace. So we are playing this card to protect our commander. I think I would rather the Kaya's ghost form. I think this is what I would prefer, because if I'm enchanting my commander to stop them from being affected by things, I'd rather just have the one that protects them from everything and always brings them back outside of a bounce or a shuffle. I think that's a lot better. And this only protects from 2 colors, which I'm going to say once again, at this power level, I don't see those being the colors that you should be afraid of. Don't get me wrong, Lightning Bolt is very relevant, but your opponents are going to Swords to Plowshare, Path to Exile, Pugnify, Rapid Hybridization. They're going to use board clears. Like, I don't see this being particularly the thing that's going to protect your commander. And at this power level, I don't see why you're playing this. So this should be a land for sure. Reconnaissance, on the other hand, is very, very good here, and I do very much so appreciate it. So I think that's fine. But Brave the Sands is profoundly confusing here. I don't understand why we need vigilance on our creatures. Have our creatures come in tapped and attacking, so they can't take advantage of this. And what are we blocking with? Like, we do have Death Touch creatures, don't get me wrong. Or at least I believe we have a few, right? We definitely have a few. We have we have Queen Marchesa and the like. We definitely have Death Touch creatures, but like they tend to be really low on power, and we tend to not want them to die. So we're not blocking with them. Like we're an aggressive deck, we're attacking, and I guess the Vigilance makes up for that. Sorry, let me rephrase this. We do have the means to attack with Vigilance and keep our creatures back, but we're not blocking with Altaïr. We're not often going to trade our creatures for other creatures, and if our opponents are worried about our attacks, they're just going to destroy our creatures, and all of a sudden Brave the Sands does nothing. So this feels like another card you're just going to play and not really get any benefit from. It doesn't help our main plan. It feels almost worse than like Ghostly Prison. Like if you're worried about defense, just play Ghostly Prison in a deck like this. And even then, I wouldn't play that, so I don't see that being particularly good. Finally, Impact Tremors is also a card that I'm just a little unimpressed with this build. It is representing in this deck a damage of like what? Let's say 1, 2, so it goes up by 2-ish. If we're playing a creature every turn and then we're exiling the same amount of we have the same amount of creatures in exile plus 1 every time, it means it'll be something like 2 damage the first time, 4 damage the next time, 6 damage the next time, and that does add up, but it is still incredibly reliant on our commander and our game plan functioning. If our game plan's not functioning, this is doing like 1 per turn cycle, and that's not impressive or useful to you in any means. It's just kind of annoying your opponents who are probably putting together combos or better board states to take you out. One late game, this is phenomenal because you are attacking, dealing 7 damage to each of your opponents, and have a bunch of threats they have to deal with, destroying their creatures and likewise. But up until then, it just sits on the board, very much so like Brave the Sands, just sitting pretty and not doing much. I can't even see a board where your opponents care to remove Impact Tremors because most of their removal will most likely be targeted at Altaïr instead, because why wouldn't you? Stop the thing that creates the tokens or the copies as opposed to the thing that benefits from it. Okay, finally, I just did want to point out that I think, so Chaos Warp is just a little too cute here, but I'm not quite sure what you'd play instead because a lot of the other cards like not Gifts Ungiven, sorry. The Elephant card, I'm sorry. Stroke of Midnight's the other version, but 3 mana destroy target permanent cards. They're all kind of the same. This one's probably the weakest when you have access to Stroke of Midnight instead, because I'd rather give them a 1/1 than give them whatever's in their deck, because, you know, often they don't get good cards, but sometimes they absolutely get a really good card, and at this power level, I'm a little wary of that. So Chaos Warp feels a little cute. Okay. Let's go into additions. I wanted to address I have like 2 cards here, I think, about putting cards in graveyards, and the first one I wanted to suggest is Inti. Inti is not an assassin, but Inti is a very, very powerful card. It notably grows your attacking creatures, notably Altaïr, who gets better with the first strike, and it gives trample, which I also really like. The ability to get a little bit of damage through every time, specifically, mind you, on Altaïr or creatures that aren't tokens, is pretty good. But in addition to, discarding a card and doing all that, you do get the top card exiled, which lets you cast it. And if we reduce the mana cost of the deck as a whole, I think more often than not, you'll get to cast it. Inti is phenomenal in a lot of formats. I think they're very slept on as a powerful card, and I think this is the kind of deck that I really do like this ability. If this triggers once or twice, I think it's very, very good. Don't forget, it's when you attack, so Inti can just be cast and summoning sick, and you'll still get it. I think you'll be very happy with this ability, letting you dig a little further and trash cards out of your hand. Notably, this does work with Altaïr the turn, right? So no, you have to target beforehand. So I will say something that's worth noting is Inti will not be able to put a card in and you immediately exile it, because Altaïr needs a target when the trigger goes on the stack. So there is a downside to them, but I think the strength is still very, very high. Especially if you can do like a 1-drop and then Inti, attack, discard, and then play Altaïr on the next turn. Unmarked Grave is the other one. This is sometimes, in my mind, a poor man's Entomb or a poor person's Entomb. And I know you're playing Entomb, but if you want this ability to get the right card, it doesn't hurt to have a second tutor card. 2 mana is still reasonable and it is very powerful, and I prefer this a lot more than a number of like the Faithless Looting abilities. Don't get me wrong, when I was playing Red-Black Phoenix Reanimate, I really did enjoy having a bunch of the discard effects in addition to this, but you're not full-on Reanimate because you want to reanimate, like you have a depth of creatures you want to reanimate as opposed to just one at a time, and therefore reducing the numbers of just random discards, I think it'll work a little better. Maybe I'm a little wrong about that, but either way, if you're looking for more abilities to put creatures in the graveyard, Unmarked Grave's a pretty good place to start. Another card I want to play, namely because someone commented recently that they didn't like this card in Commander, and I did want to answer that, and I do think it belongs here for sure, is Lava Spur Boots. Lava Spur Boots is very, very powerful, both as, you know, functionally Lightning Greaves when they're both in your hand, because they both cost 2 mana to play and equip, but also the ability to add an extra power to your first strike commander, to give it haste and give it ward 1 are all effects that you're going to be very, very happy with. And later in the game, when you recast them, being able to equip for just 1 more, it's not the same as Lightning Greaves, but it is still very, very good. I think you'll be very, very happy. I agree that not every deck wants this ability, but if you are an aggressive deck, if you can use that 1 power, if that 1 ward, your ward 1 is very attractive to you, which for a lot of commanders it should be, I think this is a very good card to consider. Especially if you're a deck playing Urza Saga, you should be playing this card, I would say. Going on, I want another way or two to take advantage of our pseudo reanimate plan, and for that, I want literal reanimate and I want animate dead. The reason I want these cards is that this is how we can get Elshnorn Grand Cenobite out. I think this is reasonable. I think you have a lot of ways to bin the Elshnorn to discard. Obviously, Unmarked Grave doesn't work with it, but entomb them into your graveyard, and then having access to reanimate to bring them back is reasonable. That is something a deck with, you know, 32 lands, for example, can reasonably do, instead of sitting around with the idea that we're going to hardcast Elshnorn. So these cards, I don't think are too expensive. I know Reanimate's a little more, $5, $6, but it just got reprinted, and I think it is particularly good. Animate Dead also just got reprinted, but if these two cards don't work, you can try cards like Persist. It doesn't get Elshnorn, but it will get other things, or Victimize and the like that are still good at reanimating cards, but not as efficient. Once again, a lot of the efficiency of the cards that I'm pushing out are because of the sheer power level of the deck, which I should get back to at the end. Dark Confidant is something else I think you should be playing. You're in black, you have you need some card draw, and this is a creature that can attack. Obviously not an assassin, and maybe to an extent can be replaced by Necropotence, Necrodominance, and the like at this power level, but even then, I still like Dark Confidant. It is still a powerful card, and something you can just play and forget, or play and, you know, get a few attacks in. I think it'll be a good kind of inclusion, and will kind of take a bit of pressure off of the amount of lands in your deck when you are drawing 2 cards a turn. Speaking of mana, I think coming to the end of my additions, Dark Ritual is a very, very powerful card, and though the current build can't necessarily use it in the ways that I would like, namely because you have a 3-color commander and a lot of your very powerful cards tend to be multiple colors, Dark Ritual can still be very good here. I think there's a number of things you can do, whether powering out mana rocks or using it in addition to fast mana to cast some cards, to get some card draw, to get some tutors. There's a lot we can do here that I particularly like, but with that in mind, I'm gonna put a big asterisk that maybe some massaging of the deck to make this work would make it better. This would be one of the things that I would say makes Bolas's Citadel a little more castable, but even then, more lands is the answer. All right. Did you note I didn't add Lightning Bolt because I would rather lands to be added first before Lightning Bolt, but absolutely, once you get room, Lightning Bolt should be on the list as well. All right, before we finish, and also because I've been a little hard on the deck, and I hope that's okay, but I wanted to talk about one more time the thing about power level. Something that our deck builder mentioned in their comment was, I added some expensive cards because I already have those, but I don't want to spend a lot of money on it. Now, I want to address this as a power level cautionary tale. as we ramp up the power level of our decks, even if it is not a monetary budget, but something we just have access to Lotus Petal, Chrome Mox, Mana Crypt, we just have access to Entomb and Lightning Tutor, we just have access to Gamble, which is only a few bucks anyways. Why wouldn't I put them in? Well, inevitably, either your opponents or your play group are going to match that power level. Dockside, the mouse ended on accidentally, but is another good example of this. You know, either they're going to meet you at that power level, or you're just going to blow them out of the water and no one wants to play with you. Assuming the latter doesn't happen, and everyone has the means or proxies in order to meet you at this power level, I fear this deck will not be able to dance at that power level, and hence a lot of my suggestions. Now, add lands no matter what, but if you're thinking whether or not you want to take out, you know, Elish Norn, if you want to take out Port Razor, maybe the smaller Elish Norn, actually even the other Elish Norn, or the Master, or Lucille, cards that you probably very much so like, Maskwood Nexus and Bolas' Citadel, if you don't want to remove these, I get that, but the deck is very powerful, and therefore these are the changes that need to happen. Because if I showed up at a Commander pod group, you know, we're going to play some Commander together, and we have Mox Fields, so, you know, we're deciding what the power level of our decks should be, and we should figure out what we're going to play, and you gave me this, I would bring something of an appropriate power level to deal with it, right? And those decks that have fast mana and tutors, which probably are just shy of CDH power level, will have a very, very strong time against this deck, as you have no counter magic, you're low on removal, and your deck kind of is crippled by the destruction of your commander. Don't get me wrong, you could have incredibly strong turns by like getting out a turn 2 Smothering Tithe, maybe even a turn 1 Smothering Tithe. I'm sure that's somewhat possible. Looks possible. And that'll get you going, but at the same time, I'm very confident that if I hate Altaïr out of the game, you're kind of out of the game. So if that's something that doesn't appeal to you, maybe consider lowering the power of the deck. Because honestly, that appeals to me. I love playing incredibly powerful fragile decks, and I love playing as many times as I can, so I wouldn't mind taking a deck that is somewhat fragile, but still fun to play, and I wouldn't mind if I just get knocked out of the game very quickly. That's a decision you need to make. Thank you so much for sending this deck. I hope this was, you know, a useful video. I know I've been kind of hard on the deck, especially with the lands, but I hope that encourages you to put more lands and move forward with the deck. I'm excited. I hope you send me another draft. Maybe let's wait until after the Assassin set comes out, because perhaps this is going to have a few more cards that rocket it in power level, or otherwise give you just better options instead of a few other creatures you might have here. And we'll see where we land there. Thank you so much. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.